All right. I think we are live. Hello. All right. I'm going to give everybody a minute to hop on. Super excited to be here tonight with y'all. Let's see. If you are here, please jump in the chat. Say hi. Hey, guys. Got a couple of y'all. All right. Okay. Well, I'm just going to jump right in because we have a lot of information to cover tonight. My name is Katie Soon, and I am an AP Government and Politics teacher in Covington, Louisiana. Tonight we have with us our fabulous TA, Rita, who is a AP Government veteran. She has not only taken the test, but passed with flying colors. So she is here to answer all of your questions. So get excited. She is in the chat with us tonight and will also be over on Discord afterwards to answer questions. So please feel free to put questions in the chat as we go through this. All right. So if y'all are ready, I guess let's just jump right in. Just a heads up, this stream is being recorded, and so it might be on the website, YouTube, or any other public channels. As you know, you are not being recorded, but I might, pull your name from a chat or something like that. So just a heads up that might happen. Also, we are on all the social media accounts. We have a Twitter, an Instagram, a YouTube. So please connect with us. We would love to hear what you have to say and see what you're thinking about AP tests and just get to know you more. Also, we have some awesome trivia events coming up. So please take a part of this. The link is in the slides that are linked with this stream. So please just click on this link. It'll take you right to the trivia event. And here are the dates and times. So as you can see, the Unit 2, which we're covering tonight, that trivia event is tomorrow night at 9:30 p.m. All right, so we're going to do a couple polls real quick, do a little temperature check. And the first one is just, where are you from? North, South, Central, International? Love to get to know y'all a little bit more and just kind of see where everybody is from. Like I said, I am from Louisiana, so I am way down south. I live just north of New Orleans. Very fun place to live. Gotta love Mardi Gras. All right, 2 votes for the North. Oh, we got 2 votes for the South. Oh, neck and neck. We're North and South. Nobody from Central and nobody International. All right, awesome. So it looks like, we're still tied. Oh, here we go. South is winning. All right, I think South is gonna take it on this one. But very close. Very, very good to see y'all voting. Thank you. Next up, how are you feeling about the AP Gov test? And oh, nope, sorry, messing up my polls. Oh, and you know what? I think the poll feature might have just broke. Oh no. Well, throw it in the chat. How are you feeling about the AP test? If you had to put a number on 0 through 10, how you're feeling. 10 being terrible, 0 being fabulous. So I guess what is your stress level for the AP test? If anybody wants to throw a number in the chat. 5, 4 to 6, 4, 6. So looks like we got a lot of people right in the middle. 5, 6, 5, 6. Nice. Okay, so hopefully by the end of this, your stress level jumps, 1 or 2 points down with each cram. I know as an AP teacher, I'm sure your AP teachers can relate. We're all feeling a little stressed right now, trying to cram all the rest of the information in, get test prep done, and get y'all ready for this test. All right, so the last thing I want to know is, did you attend the last cram session? So you can just write in the chat, yes, no, or did you watch the playback? So I would just love to see like how people are watching it. Jim, the recording of the video should be made available. Last time it was right away. Hopefully it stays. Is it not up yet? The last one? My side might look different from y'all's. So I know I can see it. Oh, yes. This is your first. Yes, replay should be available right after the cram. If you aren't able to see it right away, feel free to jump in Discord and message me and I will figure it out for you. Oh, today should be available right after and definitely by tomorrow. And if you don't see it by then, just let me know and I will find it for you. You're welcome. Okay. All right, so this is what we're covering today. We are covering Unit 2 of AP Gov. So this is kind of like the basics of government. It's one of those sections that is kind of just like nitty gritty. Here are the facts. Here's what's happening with government. So it's kind of like our basics that we need to know so that we can move forward and really understand the government systems. All right, so let's start with Congress. So we have the Senate and the House of Representatives makes up Congress. So Congress is what we call the entire, the entire group together of the Senate and the House of Representatives. I'm sure a lot of you feel like that's really obvious, but a lot of people actually get kind of confused on that Congress is made up by Senate and the House of Representatives. All right, so this is a bicameral system. It's a 2-house legislature. The Senate is designed to represent the state equally, while the House of Representatives is designed to represent the population. And does anybody remember what compromise made this happen? Anyone wants to throw it in the chat? We had a major compromise during the Constitutional Convention. Anybody know it? No, that's okay. It is the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise, known as both. You can go with either one, but it made, oh, there we go. We got Great Compromise. Yeah, okay. I'm just a little behind. Sorry, jumped ahead of y'all. Connecticut Compromise, Great Compromise, Connecticut. Good. Okay, so y'all are right on it. So this made up this bicameral system. And so the different chamber sizes and constituencies influence the formality of debate. And so when we talk about formality of debate, we're talking about how what are the rules of decorum? So rules of decorum mean like basically the rules of how things are going to be run. We want a system that is going to actually work. And so you have to do that based on size. So when we think of the House of Representatives versus the Senate, the House of Representatives based on population is much larger than the Senate. So they have to have a lot more rules so that things run smoothly. So just think of House of Representatives, lots of rules of decorum are just lots of rules. And the Senate is less rules. It's a little more laid back, maybe not like formality wise, but they don't have as many rules because it's less people. And so they have more freedom. to just speak freely. So when we break it down right now, the Senate has 100 members. They are in term for 6 years, and they have to be at least 30 years old, a citizen for the past 9 years, and a resident of the state they represent. The unique power of the Senate is that they provide advice and consent on treaties and presidential appointments. So this is anybody the president appoints, like maybe a SCOTUS member. The Senate gets to kind of offer their advice and consent basically by interviewing the person and then voting and deciding whether or not that person gets the confirmation. They also handle the trial of the impeached officials. And so we'll talk about that in a second, a little bit more. And then the House of Representatives is much bigger compared to the Senate at 100 members. It has 435 members. Their term length is also much shorter, only 2 years. And they have more lenient qualifications. They only have to be 25 years old, a citizen for the past 7 years, and a resident of the state which they represent. Their unique powers is they originate all revenue bills. And so when you hear revenue, think money. They also initiate impeachment documents. And so when they impeach somebody, remember, when you're impeached, it doesn't mean you're removed from office. It just means they're brought the articles of impeachment together to start the process. Then that process moves to the Senate, and the Senate then hears the case for impeachment and then decides whether or not to vote the person out of office. Then they also break ties for president in the Electoral College for the House of Representatives. And then we just had a question: are we expected to know specific numbers? How will that be tested? I would be familiar with numbers, especially like what votes are 2/3 votes, what votes are 3/4 votes. I would know 6 years, 2 years, things like that. I would know basics. So those numbers, yes. I can't say exactly what's going to be on the AP test, like we don't know, but these are numbers you're going to want to at least be able to see and identify. I would know qualifications as well. Since all of these things are in the CED, our course exam description, I would know them. Sorry, I know that's probably not the answer you were hoping for, but yes, you're going to want to know this. Make sure you know it. So when we talk about the structures and processes of the Senate and the House of Representatives, it's important to remember that the Senate is less centralized, where the House of Representatives is more centralized and more hierarchical. I'm sorry, I can't say that word. I try so hard and it doesn't really want to come out. Hierarchical. So in the Senate, committees don't have as much authority. They have a looser form of debate. They also have the filibuster that is allowed but limited by a cloture vote. And that filibuster is interesting because recently they've been trying to decide whether or not to get rid of it. And there's been talk of finding ways to remove that from the Senate, the filibuster. And so that has brought up a lot of controversy. And some people feel very strongly that we have a filibuster. Some people feel very strongly that we get rid of it. So that's just kind of an interesting current event tie. Also, the Senate focuses on foreign policy, and the leaders of the Senate are less powerful, except for the powerful majority leader. And so we'll talk about what it means to be a leader of the Senate or a leader of the House of Representatives in a few minutes. The House of Representatives is much more centralized and hierarchical. And when we talk about why they have such a hierarchy process, it's again, because they have so many people, they need a good system and they need lots of structure so that it doesn't turn into just mass chaos. They also have the Rules Committee, and the majority party is the one that controls the agenda of the House of Representatives. They also have limited debate time. So if you've ever watched a debate, it's actually very interesting. They'll say things like, you know, Mr. Representative, you have X amount of minutes on the clock. And they can either choose to use them, or they'll say things like, I yield my time to Mrs. Senator from Minnesota. And so they can say, I see that I have time. I thank you for my time, but I am choosing to give my time to someone, usually from my party, that's going to argue on my behalf, that might, know the case more. So I've always thought that was interesting to watch, but it's very, very formal. And then, so yes, so it's just important to remember, less centralized in the Senate because they have less members or fewer members. So when you have fewer members, you're allowed to, you're just allowed a little more freedom because it doesn't need to be as controlled. Where with the House of Representatives, super big, lots of people, over 400 members. And so they just need to be able to control the chaos. And I'm sorry if you can hear the screaming in the background. I have little kids and they are supposed to be in bed right now, but we all know little kids. All right, so let's talk about the structures, powers, and functions of Congress. All right, so policy making, structures and processes. So Congress is organized by House, political party, leadership, and committee. So these are all things can separate out how it is, how it's structured. The different parties create leadership positions to help guide their own party members, move legislation along, and carry out party goals. The party with the most members is known as the majority party and is in a strong position to set the agenda through its leaders and committee chairpersons. And then we have standing committees. And so these standing committees are where the real work gets done, especially in the more structured House. And so these committees are groups of smaller amounts of people that work on bills. Because if we think about it, if we had to, argue every single bill and all the different parts of the bill on the floor of Congress, so on the floor of the Senate or on the floor of the House, we would never get anything done. And so instead, we take these bills and we put them into different committees. And the committee gets to break it down and talk to people that understands the content and really kind of get to the nitty gritty and write it out. And then once they're done with it, then it goes to the floor and it gets voted on. So the leadership that's outlined by the Constitution is that we have a Speaker of the House, and this is the head of the House of Representatives and is a member of the majority party. Then we have the President of the Senate. This is the Vice President of the United States, who is also the head of the Senate. So it kind of plays a double role there. Then we have the President pro tempore of the Senate. And this is the person that presides over the Senate when the Vice President of the United States can't physically be there. And so if you think about it, the Vice President of the United States has a lot to do. He has a very big job. And so he can't always be in the Senate to be the head of the Senate. So whenever he is not there, the President pro tempore steps in. But these three positions are the only leadership positions outlined in the Constitution. So when we look at it, we actually have a lot more leadership positions that have been made since the Constitution has been written. And this is kind of how it breaks down. First, in the House of Representatives, it starts with the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is at the top. Then underneath is the Majority Leader, and then the Minority Leader. And then the Majority Leader has a Majority Whip, and the Minority Leader has a Minority Whip. So think of it kind of like a tree, and how it gets broken down. And then very similarly in the Senate, we have at the top the Vice President of the United States, aka the President of the Senate. Then we have in their place, if they are not there, then the President pro tempore steps in. So that's like kind of that 1.5 is it's not a full step below, just kind of a sidestep. Then we've got the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, and then the Majority Whip and the Minority Whip. All right, so committees. Again, committees, this is where the real work gets done. That's what's important to know about committees. There's a lot of different types of committees. There's a lot of, a lot of things that you can know about committees, but ultimately, if you know committee is where the Congress's work gets done, you're going to be way ahead of the game. So committees are not mentioned in the Constitution, but they have been a fixture in Congress since it first met. So they've always had committees in Congress, even though in the Constitution it's not outlined. So the smaller groups can tackle tough issues and draft more precise laws than the entire House or Senate can, just like we spoke about a minute ago. Committees allow lawmakers to put their expertise to use, and they make the progress of moving a bill to a law manageable. So if you think about taking a bill, making it a law, and all the things that go into it, that is so intense. That is such a big process. And so when we put a small team on this, they're able to get it done. They're able to break it down into bite-sized pieces and push it through so that it can then become a law. So each committee has a head chairperson, and the head chairperson is the person that's in charge of the committee and helps to keep things moving along. And the head committee chairperson is always a member of the majority party and has experience on that committee. So there are lots of different types of committees. We have education committees, we have budget committees, all different types of committees. And so a head chairperson is going to have experience on that type of committee, and they're going to be a member of the majority party. That's what's important to know there. And then we have a vice committee chairperson, and they're a member of the minority party. So when we talk about and voting, when we get to like big presidential elections, and we're talking about, okay, who's going to take the House, who's going to take the Senate, which party is going to win. These are all the different pieces that go into that, and why it's so important, and why party members feel like it's so important that their party wins, is because it doesn't just affect, who has the most people, so who gets the most votes in Congress. It also breaks down to different chairpersons setting the agenda, and like who's in charge, like who is the House leader, things like that. All right, so enumerated powers. Enumerated powers is a huge buzzword that everybody needs to know. And enumerated powers means powers expressly written in the Constitution. And so anything that is specifically outlined to the Constitution is written down, is known as an enumerated power. And the enumerated powers in the Constitution that allow for the creation of public policy by Congress includes the passing of a federal budget, raising revenue, and coining money. They're also allowed to declare war and maintain the armed forces. They can enact legislation that addresses a wide range of economic, environmental, and social issues based on the necessary and proper clause. And the necessary and proper clause is also another big, big buzzword. And necessary and proper clause basically says that Congress is able to make whatever law they need that is necessary and proper to run the government. And remember, this was their fail-safe clause, to make sure that what happened with the Articles of Confederation doesn't happen again. So with the Articles of Confederation, remember, it was really, really hard to change that. It was really hard to add things. It was really hard to fix what was wrong. And they were like, well, we don't want that to happen again. So what if our Constitution messes up? Okay, let's put a necessary and proper clause in so that we can make sure that if we don't know, or if we don't have what we need written in to law, we can make that happen so that we don't have to just throw the entire thing out and start over. I'm sorry, was that clear for everybody? If that was not clear, let me know and I will try to restate that. So just let me know. But important things to know off this slide is enumerated powers are powers expressly written in the Constitution. Necessary and proper clause says that the Congress can write any law that's necessary and proper for the government to run. All right, so these are our main types of committees. And so with our committees, we have standing committees, and these are permanent committees that handle most of Congress's work. And so standing committees, so these are going to be the type of committees that we always have every single year. So like a budget committee or an education committee, things like that. Then we have joint committees. These are for members of both houses that address long-term issues or programs. So that's where people from the Senate and people from the House of Representatives get together for joint committee meetings. Then we have a select or special committee. And if it's a select or special committee, these are temporary committees that handle a particular issue or investigation. So if there is a specific issue that is brand new or a specific investigation, like an impeachment, they're going to put together a committee for this. And this is a select or special committee to handle the issue. And then once the issue is handled, that committee is disbanded. And then we have conference committees, and this is where the House and the Senate members come together to reconcile similar bills. And so we'll talk about this more in a minute, but what this means is that you can have a bill go from the House and go to the House, then go to the House committee, then go to the House floor, get voted on, then go to the Senate. Then from the Senate, it goes to a Senate committee. And while it's in the Senate committee, it can be rewritten and changed, and then go to the Senate floor and get voted on. Well, then they have to come together for a conference committee because any changes that were made in either the Senate or the House that were made after the previous side voted on it, they have to come together and reconcile any differences and agree on it. And then it has to go back to the House and the Senate and be voted on again. So it's a very long process for a bill to become a law. Oh, sorry, I had a whole slide for it and I talked about it without the slide. I apologize. So this kind of looks like a bit of a Monopoly map, but this is how a bill becomes a law. So just again, it starts in either the House or the Senate. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Give me a little thumbs up if you can see my cursor. I can use it to kind of point. But so it starts, and then it can go either the House or the Senate first, goes to the committees, then the committees will mark it up, change it, do what they need to do to make it work. Then it goes to the floor to be voted on. Then it goes to the committee reports on the bill oh, you can see my cursor. Awesome. Committee reports and bill is put on the House calendar. Then they read it, they debate it, and then they vote on it. Then they swap and it starts again. Bill is introduced to the floor, then it goes to committee, blah, blah, blah. So all of this has to happen. So you have to think this is a very, very slow process. And so when you think of Congress, think of slow change. And this is very important to remember. Slow change in Congress. Because of Congress is such a slow change, this is going to be the justification that our framers are going to use for the need of a president. But we will talk about that in a little bit. Oops, there we go. Okay, so these things don't totally go together, but these are just important kind of buzzword definitions that I would like you to know for the AP test. And so first up is pork barrel spending. And these are funds earmarked for special purposes in a legislator's district. So if funds have to be spent in a certain way, because they're earmarked and they say this is how they need to be spent, this is pork barrel spending. Next definition, we have log rolling, and this is trading votes to gain support for a bill. By agreeing to support someone else's bill, members can secure a vote in return for a bill of their own. So basically, it's like going to your buddy and being like, hey, I'll vote for your bill if you vote for mine. And this is called log rolling. Then we have discretionary spending. This is funding that congressional committees debate and decide how to divide up. So discretionary spending, think about it as discretionary, meaning money available to be spent. Then we have mandatory spending, and this is payments required by law or mandated for certain programs. And examples of this would be Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, unemployment. So stuff that's already written into law, we can't change it. Well, I mean, we can, but we'd have to like go through the process of changing the law to make that happen. It's not like with discretionary spending where you're like, okay, this is just money that's allowed to be spent in the budget, and we can decide how we want to do that. All right. So congressional behavior. So I think this is very interesting. Voting models. So people of Congress can take different types of voting models, and rarely is someone all one thing. Usually they're a mix. But first we have the delegate model, and this is where representatives try to reflect the will of their constituents in their votes. So they try to represent what their constituents stand for when they're voting on bills. Next, we have the trustee model. And this is where representatives believe that they are entrusted by their constituency to use their best judgment, regardless of how their constituents may feel or may view an issue. So basically, this comes down to, yes, my constituents would probably vote one way, but this is my conscience and this is how I'm going to vote. Because I was the representative they chose, then I am free to make that decision. And then there's a Politico model that attempts to blend the delegate and the trustee models together. So sometimes they do one, sometimes they do the other. So you'd say that most representatives and Senate members are probably fall under the Politico model, where sometimes they're going to say, I'm going to vote with my constituents, and sometimes I'm going to vote my own conscience. But these are just our three models: delegate, trustee, and Politico. And just for fun, I would like to hear which one, if you were in Congress today, how would you choose to vote? Would you choose to be a delegate model and vote with your constituents because you feel like they voted you and that's your job to represent them? Or would you say, no, they trusted me to be their representative, so they're trusting that I'm going to make the best decision, so I'm using the trustee model? Or, are you a little bit in the middle? Would you go kind of either or, depending on the issue, and go Politico? Oh, we got a lot of votes for Politico. Anybody think differently besides Politico? Nope, everybody's in the same boat. Okay, awesome. I think that is the easiest one because you don't have to make a decision. You can kind of go a little bit of both. But also, I think a lot of people would say it depends on the issue. There are some issues that you feel really, really strongly about that you don't feel like you could vote against your conscience on. And then there are some things where you're like, well, I don't really feel strongly about this, but my constituents do, so I'm going to vote with them. So there's a lot of different ways people look at this. There is no right or wrong in this. I'm sure personally we can all decide like, oh, that one sounds bad or that one sounds good. But ultimately, there is no right or wrong. It's just the three different models of voting. All right, so I know this has a lot of words on this slide, so don't panic. This was just really good information, and I wanted to make sure we got all of it. So redistricting. So following the constitutionally required census every 10 years. And so the census is where they send the census out, and we all people over 18 will respond, and they'll talk about how many people live in their household and what their demographics are and how much education they have, things like that. And then they use this to shape the congressional districts based on shifts in population. But this can be used for good and for bad, kind of. So State legislators' redistricting process is often very, very competitive, and members of both parties vie to strengthen their party's chances of winning congressional elections through redistricting. The redistricting process has increased partisanship, and remember, partisanship means like separation of parties, basically, sticking with your party, and it has decreased accountability. The majority party in the state legislature often determines the new statewide congressional map, usually benefiting that party. So whoever's in power when the redistricting happens is going to get to decide how the map is written and try to make it so that they stay in power. So, but too often, these maps are illogically drawn to give the advantage to one party. And this is called gerrymandering. So this is an important word to know. Gerrymandering, and this is where districts in which a party consistently wins by more than 55% of the vote are considered safe seats. And those districts with closer elections are referred to as marginal seats or swing districts. So whoever's in power tries to get rid of as many marginal seats or swing districts as possible and create them into safe seats. And so we can see this is a real map in Chicago that kind of shows some serious gerrymandering. All right, so this brings us to our first required SCOTUS case. And so remember, we have required Supreme Court cases that you need to know for the AP test and that you're going to need to cite on the AP test. And so first up is Baker versus Carr from 1962. And the big overall question from this is, can the Supreme Court render judgment on the constitutionality of legislative districts? And the decision was yes, they can, in a 6-2 vote. So when we break it down, it comes down to a Tennessee law from 1901 laid out guidelines for redrawing state legislative boundaries, and the state constitution required redistricting every 10 years based on census reports. However, the legislator had failed to redraw the state's 95 voting districts since the census of 1900. And remember, this is 1962, so they haven't redrawn the voting map for 62 years. And instead, it had continued to apply the apportionment guidelines for the 1901 law. As cities grew, rural areas kept much lower constituent to lawmaker ratios. So if you think about it, if you imagine every part of the map is like little tiny squares, and if all squares are equal, but people who live in the city have much more densely populated squares, where people that live out in, more like kind of farmland or out in rural areas have very few people per little square, then which square is going to get, does your voice matter more in? And so if you live in a rural area, all of a sudden your vote carries more weight. And so they're going to decide that this isn't fair. So they argued that this violated the Equal Protection Act of the 14th Amendment because one person's vote was not necessarily equal to another person's vote. So the outcome of this is the effects of Baker versus Carr were widespread, since not only Tennessee, but all states had to redraw legislative boundaries as a result, because each person's vote had to be weighted equally. So you have to take population into account when you're looking at creating the different sorry, I totally lost my words. I apologize. When you're creating the different districts, you have to take population into account so that everybody's vote is equal. So you'll see in rural areas, we need much bigger squares to equal the same amount of people as in big cities will have much smaller squares. So ideally, everybody has an equal vote. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the Baker versus Carr? Are we good? All right. Next up for SCOTUS cases is Shaw versus Reno from 1993. All right. And so this major constitutional question is, does a congressional district designed for the purpose of assuring a majority Black population violate the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Act? Oh, and then I just saw a question pop up. Do we need to know the specific justices involved? No, you don't. You just need to know, be able to kind of summarize the case and be able to cite the case with evidence in your writing. But they're not going to say like, oh, which justices voted on this. All right. So the decision was yes for Shaw in a 5-4 vote. So here are the facts. After the 1990, there we go. After the 1990 census and in compliance with the 1965 Voting Rights Act, North Carolina submitted to the Federal Justice Department its new map of congressional districts for review. So once they make their map, they have to then send it off to get it reviewed to make sure it's not gerrymandered. So decades of racial gerrymandering had effectively disenfranchised the Black population in North Carolina and kept them from serving as politicians in the state. To correct that problem, the court had ruled that using race as a basis in creating legislative districts, including so-called majority-minority districts, so majority, so that's a majority of minority people, that contained more Black than white residents was permissible in the interest of fairness. So the North Carolina map that was submitted only had one majority-minority district, and the U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno sent the maps back for redistricting. So the outcome or precedent that was set was that the court's decision in the Shaw case shows that using only race as a factor in creating district was not aligned with the 14th Amendment. So you can use race you can use race in deciding out maps. That's part of the reason we ask about race in censuses, but it can't be the only thing that you use to make a map. And Jackson, how much depth should we know about the required cases? You're going to want to be able to know, like, summarize each one of them. If I had to, like, I'm not the College Board, so I can't speak, with all authority, but I would maybe throw out, I wouldn't memorize 5-4 vote. I would just remember the decision was yes for Shaw. I would make sure I knew the outcome. I'd make sure I knew the precedent it set, and that I could summarize it in in 1 to 3 sentences. So a good way to do this is if you kind of flashcard it. I would flashcard the SCOTUS cases and put all of them on a flashcard, and whatever information you can fit on the back of a flashcard, that's the information you need to know. But how I've set this up as like constitutional question, decision, facts, outcome, and precedent, I'm not going to put anything on any of these slides that I don't think you need to know for the test. Except I guess I did put the 5-4 vote. I just thought that was interesting. But I'm trying to think, sorry. You're going to want to know big picture things, big picture, and be able to cite it and argue it against another SCOTUS case for your writing. And we'll spend, in another Cram session, we will spend a lot of time talking about like writing SCOTUS FRQs and what that's going to look like and what you need to know. All right, so now we're going to switch over and we're going to talk about the president. So roles and powers of the president. So the presidency comes with ceremony, customs, and expectations and has been enhanced beyond its expressed constitutional powers. So the role of the president has grown since it was first written in the Constitution. To be president, you must be a natural born citizen, at least 35 years old, and a U.S. resident for the last 14 years before taking office. So you can't be a U.S. citizen but have lived in France for the past 20 years. You have to be living in America for the last 14 years, so that just the idea of that you're connected to the people, you're connected to the current events, and that you kind of have an understanding of what's going on. The president is also known as the commander-in-chief of the military and has the power to issue pardons of reprieves and to appoint ambassadors, judges, and other public ministers. The president can recommend legislative measures to Congress, veto or approve proposed bills, and convene or adjourn the House of Congress. All right, so checks on the presidency. And this is just like the coolest picture. But anyways, the framers of the Constitution took seriously the concerns of the Anti-Federalists. Remember, the Anti-Federalists were against the signing of the Constitution because they didn't want a president, because they didn't want one person in charge and they didn't want it turning into a monarchy. So a lot of the checks on the president have to do with Anti-Federalist ideas and Anti-Federalist concerns. And so this included specific roles and several provisions to limit the powers of the president. The Senate has the power to provide advice and consent on the president's appointments. For example, I would say that like when the president nominates a new SCOTUS member, then the Senate gets to interview that person and decide whether or not they are fit for office, and then confirm them. Then another thing is that the presidential salary is set by Congress and cannot increase or decrease during the elected term. And so this is so the president can't just give himself a nice big raise. The president is also subject to impeachment. This is another check and balance on them. And remember, the House of Representatives gets to issue the articles of impeachment, and then the Senate gets to vote on it. Okay, so this picture right here is just for a visual. Don't think you have to memorize this, so don't look at this and panic. I would not memorize all of this. I would just be able to look at this and be like, oh, all of this makes sense. And if you saw this on as a stimulus for a multiple choice question, you could look at this, read it, and interpret it. So the president is faced with countless decisions each day. I like to think of this as why the president goes gray. Have you all seen those before and after pictures of when the president becomes president? And then when the president leaves office, the president's hair always turns very, very gray, and they look like they've aged much more than just 4 years. And this comes down to all the decisions they have to make. They are in charge of an entire country. And many of those decisions have exceptionally important consequences to the fate of the nation. So imagine that weight on your shoulders. Sorry, I cannot talk tonight. Oh my gosh. Imagine that weight on your shoulders. So a large team is needed to assist the president in making these decisions. And so the president has a cabinet and then all different levels of departments and agencies to help him make decisions, because he can't know, or he or she, I should say, can't know everything about everything, right? Nobody can know everything about everything. So the president has all of these people that are specialists in their area to advise him on making decisions. So Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the president the power to assemble that group and, in quotes, appoint ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. So just kind of take a minute and just kind of, look at this list that they get to decide on, everything from their 15 cabinet, whoa, what just happened? Oh my gosh, sorry. Their 15 cabinet secretaries, all the way down to like NASA and the post office and Amtrak, to ambassadors, the US Mint, FBI, FEMA. So all sorts of different offices that the president then utilizes for information. So the expansion of presidential power. So imperial presidency. So this is a term coined for the US presidential position. We have an imperial president right now. And this is a powerful executive position guided by a weaker Congress. Its formal definition is a US presidency that is characterized by greater powers than the Constitution allows. So we have Congress, we have a president, they have checks and balances on each other. But the argument could be made that the president is above Congress, although technically SCOTUS, Congress, and the president are meant to be equals in the government. But that is just kind of an interesting term, imperial presidency. So the Enlightenment thinker, John Locke, and this is somebody that everybody should know, and you should know that John Locke was an Enlightenment thinker, argued that legislative bodies are slow to respond in emergencies. So an executive should occasionally be allowed to expand its powers. So this is very, very, very important to know. So remember how we talked earlier, we spoke about that Congress was very slow moving, that it took a long time for a bill to become a law, and that this was a safety thing, that we wanted to make sure that the majority couldn't just come in, change everything really fast, and it doesn't protect the rights of the minority. So we have a slow moving Congress. But in times of war, economic problems, domestic crises, we need strong leadership that can move very, very quickly. And so that's why we need a president. And so that is really what the Federalists argued when they argued for a president in the Constitution, that we needed someone that could move quickly in times of extremes. All right. So along with our required SCOTUS cases, we also have required documents, and these foundational documents, as they're called, are very important because you're going to need to be able to cite them. And so Federalist number 70 is a Federalist paper, and a Federalist paper was written in support of the Constitution. This one was written by Alexander Hamilton in 1788. It was written under the pen name Publius in support of the ratification of the Constitution. And it wrote that an executive branch, either a single person or a team of people, which was being considered at the time, was necessary for a good government, protection of the community, and to secure liberty and make sure laws are applied properly. Federalist number 70 argued that a feeble or weak executive or president with an equal, would equal a feeble and weak government, or even a bad government. And this is looking back on the Articles of Confederation. We didn't have a president. We didn't have somebody that could act quickly, and it led to a weak government. So if they're saying that would just happen again, if we didn't have a president, we had a feeble or weak executive president, we would have a feeble, weak government. So the president needs to be active and be able to act quickly enough not to be feeble or weak. In times of war, we don't have time for the entire Congress to decide whether or not we're going to act. We need a head president to be like, nope, this is what's happening, let's go. That is our commander in chief. And this is kind of like our protection in major crisis times. So the ingredients for a strong office of the presidency is unity, duration, and an adequate provision for its support and competent powers. And this office needs to be reliant on people and the subject of the people, and the president must answer to the people. So when we say the president must answer to the people, this is why we have the president has to run for office again in 4 years. Is this if the president doesn't follow through with what they said they were going to do and they lose the support of the people, that they can then lose their office in 4 years. And so that's what we mean by they must answer to the people. So Federalist number 70, so continuing on that, is wherever there are 2 or more people, there is danger of difference of opinion and misplaced blame when there are issues. So if we had more than one president, if we had 2, 3, 4 presidents that had to work together, not everybody's going to agree on everything. And as we all know, group projects don't always go so well. So we, whoops, sorry, I keep messing that up. Why is this happening? So that's why Federalist number 70 argued that there needs to be one president so decisions can be made quickly. And so when there's wrongdoing, it will be obvious whose fault it is. When there's something bad happens, it won't be like, okay, who do we impeach? It'll be like, no, this is the president. He gets impeached because of XYZ. Then in the legislature, moving too quickly is dangerous because it doesn't protect minorities from the majority. It's good when it moves slowly because it keeps the majority in check. But in the presidency, the president needs to be able to act swiftly for the good of the people. So ultimately, Federalist number 70 argues that we need one president because multiple presidents can have disagreements that can slow things down. So one president to move quickly, and Congress needs to be large so it moves slowly. And everybody stays safe. So presidential communication. In democracy, the presidents need to communicate with the citizens and keep good relations and Americans is essential for success. We have access to our president, and the president keeps us involved through information. And this is part of the American democracy. So another function of the president is to be the communicator in chief. And so Theodore Roosevelt coined the term bully pulpit. And this was the very unique relationship that he had with the press. He referred to the presidency as a bully pulpit, a prominent stage from where he could pitch ideas to the American people. And with bully, he meant the word excellent, not aggressive or violent, but persuasive. So to be a bully, like a bully for an idea, not like a bully of a person. So an excellent idea, excellent movement, persuading the people and keeping the people informed. So communication staff. We have a communication staff where the expansion of media has redefined the communication office's role. So we have a communications office that works for the president that is in charge of communicating information between the president and the American people. And as we know, as times have changed, as things have grown, that role has changed. So before we had television, presidents from Coolidge to Eisenhower held press conferences in front of a mix of print journalists and radio broadcasters. Then in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt pioneered the radio message with his fireside chats, and John F. Kennedy did the first live televised press conference in the early 1960s. The communications office works to control information coming out of the White House and tries to shape the president's message, what will ultimately define his policy agenda and his success or failure. So you can imagine that the communications office, especially today with the amount of social media and very easy access to information, the way information spreads so quickly, the communications office has a huge job. The State of the Union address. I love these pictures. I think they are so cool, seeing everybody together, everybody standing. I just think it's a beautiful picture of our democracy. That's kind of what it represents to me. But the State of the Union address is something that's very cool. It's the Constitution requires the president to report to Congress from time to time on the State of the Union. So it doesn't say how often, it just says time to time. During this address, the president explains the economic, military, and social state of the nation, proposes new policies, and explains how government programs are being administered. And this is something that we now see televised, so we get to watch. And I think it's very important as Americans that we take the time to watch the State of the Union address. And then this is just an interesting question that I wanted to ask y'all. Is it a good thing or a bad thing to have such rapid information updates from the president? So the president having a Twitter, the president having a Facebook, getting information from Twitter. Now Twitter is such a political outlet. Is this good or bad? What do y'all think? So modern technology has changed how we get information from the president. Social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook give us rapid information updates from the president and other political officials. So I'd love to hear if y'all like this, if y'all hate this, you think it's dangerous, you think it's awesome. And I think this might be a generational question too. I've noticed that depending on which generation I'm speaking to, they tend to have different opinions on this. As you can imagine, our younger generations tend to think this is a great idea, and our older generations are not so on board. Anybody have an opinion? No, that's okay. All right, and then finally we have our judicial branch. And we have 3 levels of court systems that make up the constitutional courts. They consist of the U.S. districts, the U.S. Circuit Courts of Appeals, and then the U.S. Supreme Court. All judges of the federal system are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and serve life terms unless they're impeached for good behavior. There was no national judiciary under the Articles of Confederation, so the constitutional framers decided to add one when they wrote the U.S. Constitution. So this is an important change between Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Article 3 of the Constitution created the Supreme Court and is the only court system mentioned in the Constitution, although it does give Congress the ability to create inferior courts. Article 3 established life terms for the judges, the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, the definition of treason, and the defendant's right to a jury trial. And interestingly enough, why do we think that the Constitution would make sure to lay out what treason meant? And since we're running out of time, I will just tell you, because all of these framers that are writing the Constitution have just taken part in the American Revolution, which ultimately was treason against Britain. So they are going to be very careful to say what treason is because they know that they have just committed it. So it's very real in their life. The idea of treason is very, it's just a very big part of who they are. So I think that's really interesting when we think about like their history in the time period. Okay, so we are actually going to skip that. The Supreme Court, also known as SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. There are 9 members of the Supreme Court, a Chief Justice, and 8 associate judges. They mostly hear cases on appeal from the circuit courts and from state Supreme Courts. The 9 members of SCOTUS decide which cases of appeal to accept. Then they sit en banc or on the bench for attorneys' oral arguments, pose questions, and engage in discussion with the litigants. They then consider their decision for weeks, sometimes months, and then vote on whether or not to overturn the lower court's ruling and then issue their reasoning. Once the Supreme Court issues its ruling, it becomes law of the land. And the Supreme Court overturns about 70% of the cases it takes. So it doesn't just take any case that's sent to the Supreme Court. They don't just say, oh, it got sent to the Supreme Court, so we have to hear it. No, they decide which cases they're going to hear. And they only take cases that they think they'll probably overturn, that are like worth hearing. So the Supreme Court takes mostly cases to decide on technicalities of constitutional law that have national and sometimes historic impacts. The power of judicial review to check other branches of government was established in 1803 with the case of Marbury versus Madison. So when you think of Marbury versus Madison, think about creation of judiciary review. So we're going to talk about that real quick. So Can an appointed judge sue for his appointment? And does the Supreme Court have the authority to hear and implement this request? And the answer is yes and no. And this was a unanimous vote. So an outgoing president, John Adams, had lost re-election to Thomas Jefferson, and in one of his final acts of president, appointed several members of his own Federalist Party to the new created judgeships. The Senate had not confirmed these midnight judges, so-called, because their appointments were made so late in the presidency. Secretary of State John Marshall, who had just been named Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, had prepared the commissions. The official notices of appointment had most of them been delivered. William Marbury was among 17 appointees who did not receive official notices. Marshall simply left these to be delivered by the next administration. So once President Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, so switching of parties, took office, he instructed his new Secretary of State, James Madison, to hold the commissions. Jefferson did reappoint several of those appointees, but he refused other on partisan grounds. Marbury wanted the Supreme Court to issue a court order known as a writ of habeas mandamus, forcing Madison and the executive branch to deliver the appointments to him and thus giving him his job. So he's suing for his job. The court unanimously ruled that it had no jurisdiction over the matter, and in so canceled Marbury's claim. It simultaneously instituted the practice of judicial review. And this is what's very important, is that in issuing judicial review, it became the practice of judicial review altogether. It created judicial review. The court had asserted its powers and checks Congress. So this is very, very, very big. All right. Federalist number 78. I know we're over time. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to go really fast. So the Federalist paper written by Alexander Hamilton, again, under the pen name Publius, in support of the ratification of the Constitution, is all about the judicial branch. We need an independent judiciary with judicial review. Life appointments, as long as judges have good behavior, so no term limits. We need this because it will lead to impartial review of the laws. This is very important. If the people on the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justices, have to answer to the people and have to think, oh gosh, my job is in jeopardy if I don't vote in the way that people like, then they're not going to vote with the Constitution in mind. They're going to vote to keep their jobs, if that makes sense. They're going to vote to keep people happy. So to take that out of it, to give them life terms so that they don't have to worry about their job being in jeopardy, they can just vote their conscience and vote the Constitution. So the Constitution is their sole focus. So the judiciary is also the least dangerous of the branches and is beyond comparison, was considered beyond comparison the weakest because it doesn't have the power of the purse or the sword, but merely judgment. So that was their argument. The Supreme Court can enforce its own rulings. It can only make rulings and then hope that others are going to enforce it for them. Life tenure is necessary to maintain an independent judiciary because if federal judges knew they could lose their jobs, just like we talked about, if the people or government didn't like their rulings, then their rulings could be affected by outside pressures. Hamilton also argues for judicial review and its necessity, and that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land and the judicial branch is to support the Constitution over Congress. So they have to, Constitution, supreme law of the land, supremacy clause kind of idea, and letting go of all outside factors. It's just about the Constitution and SCOTUS. Okay, so we are 10 minutes over, so I think we're going to have to call it, but y'all have access to this if y'all want to keep going over it. I'm going to cover this one really fast. The iron triangle, because the iron triangle is very, very important, and you will probably see it on the AP test. I'm sorry if you were still with me. Thank you for hanging out. But the iron triangle is the relationship between an agency, a congressional committee, and an interest group. It's called the iron triangle because the three-way interdependent relationships are so strong. The 3 points of the triangle forces to create policy. Iron triangle establishes a tight relationship that are often collectively beneficial. So we've got Congress, interest groups, and bureaucracy. And you can see in this picture how they work together and they put pressure on each other, creating this three-pointed, like if you think like iron pushing on iron, they all have to work together. All right. So if you have any questions, head on over to Discord. I'm going to go hang out over there. Would be happy to help you out. If you don't have Discord, you use this link. I'm going to throw this link in the chat really quick so y'all can grab it. Here we go. Please head over to Discord. Love to hang out with you. Would love to hear your voice. And I will see you at the next Cram session. Y'all are awesome. Thank you for sticking with me. Really appreciate it. I apologize for tripping over my words. Have to admit, I have a pretty bad stutter that I have worked to overcome, but always comes out, especially when I'm feeling a little nervous. So thank you for hanging out with me. Y'all are fantastic. And I will see you over in Discord. All right. Bye, guys. Thank y'all so much. And thank you to Amrita. She is fantastic. She is the queen of all of AP government. And she'll be hanging out in Discord too. So if you ever want access to her, Discord is where to find her. All right. Thanks, guys. Y'all are awesome. Have a great night. All right, gonna shut this down. Bye, guys.